using this? No?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
There we are.
I'm here, the mic's working,
Okay.
and
This one I'm not sure is, so we'll just go with one. Okay, go ahead.
well, I usually start explaining that how we got together. Well, Lori, you tell me how we got together, and then I'll say how.
Well, I'll start out by saying hi, everybody. I'm Lori, and this is George, and you probably figured that out. And we're proud to talk about the Pillsburys of Minnesota, which is a book that Note Press was good enough to publish that we've been working on for about 3 years. George and I actually talked about this book for maybe a lot longer than that. And there were lots of reasons why, yes, it's a good idea, but not yet, not now, and you can tell about how it finally came together.
How it came is that I gave a very short, superficial talk about the Pillsburys coming from New Hampshire, and I discovered there were 4 of them at that time from Sutton, and Charlie Crosby had talked to the Rosetta Historic Society a month before about the Crosbys coming from Maine, so I was kind of responding to what Charlie had said. And Lori, fortunately, heard this talk of mine on educational TV. We were having lunch one time at Lucia's, and she said, George, you've got to write a book. And I listened to her, and finally I said, Lori, I'm a math major. I can't write a book. And then Lori said, well, you write it. I said, yeah, I'll write it. And I said, well, wonderful. So that's when she took over the job of writing.
Well, you see, I've always been interested in how Minnesota got to be the special place that it is. And I knew it had something to do with those 19th century roots. I knew it had something to do with the values that people brought here, many of them from New England, I came to learn. I knew that the business community here, at least historically, was different from lots of other places. And I knew that this guy knew something about that. But I learned a whole lot more. Early on in our conversation, you told me about your family's sort of hierarchy of values. Tell everybody about that.
And my family, my mother, my father, all said you had to earn a living. First of all, you had to be a good parent, and then you had to earn a living, and then you also had to help your community in some way or another. If you look at our family, they're still working. I actually have a son who is working on world mediation. It's called Mediation Beyond Borders, and he's just been in Istanbul with a group of internationalists talking about way of settling things. So the idea that you have to have a responsibility, and if you read the book, you find out that our family was quite active. And also, I have to take my hat off to Lori. The research she did, she even discovered fifth Pillsbury I didn't know about. He came to Granite Falls. His name is Benjamin Franklin Pillsbury, and he did out in Granite Falls, Minnesota, what his older brothers had done here in Minneapolis.
It turned out that George's family's history is really the whole history of Minnesota. Governor John S. Pillsbury came to Minnesota in 1855 and opened a hardware store at the Falls of St. Anthony, right where the hay mill stands today. Within just a few years, he lost his business practically with the fire and rebuilt it again, but within just a few years, he finds himself on the city council of St. Anthony, brand new city council, then becomes a state senator, then a regent, and all the while he's engaged in business. He's building the University of Minnesota, and he's building the state through his public service. He was elected governor in 1875. He brings his brother, which is George's great-grandfather, George A. Pillsbury, and two nephews, George A.'s 2 sons, come to Minnesota. There's that 5th brother who shows up and doesn't stay very long because the Grim Reaper gets him. That happened to a lot of those 19th century Pillsburys at the end of that 19th century period. But the family's contributions to the state really are impressive and were much richer than I knew. I think the thing that you liked that I found out was that Governor John S. Pillsbury, in his first inaugural address, came out for a single-house legislature. If you know George Pillsbury, you know that's been his favorite issue.
If we ever needed a single house, what's going on over there now?
have a renewal of popularity there. Well, I learned 3 things about Minnesota that I'd like to just quickly share with you. One is it was really reinforced to me that this was historically a New England state. Interesting that Curtis just now talked about Maine. So many of our initial settlers were from New England. Those New England boys knew that running water meant money. They could turn running water into money here at the Falls of St. Anthony, and that was a magnet for a lot of New Englanders. And those New Englanders brought with them a culture of participatory democracy, town meeting governance, everybody contributing and doing their part to build a society. That same idea was reinforced when the Scandinavians began to come. And so we were a state that believed in everybody doing their part, a lot of participation, lots of layers of government. That's a New England characteristic that we followed. And belief in public education. Because if you're a town meeting style of governance, it matters that the fellow sitting next to you know a thing or two. So that became a deep part of Minnesota's culture. I was pleased to learn more about that, George, from writing about your family. Pleased to learn about the model of business engagement in the community that was set by the Pillsburys and those New Englanders who came in the 19th century, and that lingers still far into the 20th century. But the other thing that I came away with, George, is the sense of how young this state is. It's 4 generations of this family, that's all. That says to me that this is still a place of great possibility. I'm going to read a little bit, George, if you don't mind, you'll hold that. I'll find the place we marked in the book. This is a passage that comes at the end of the chapter about, at the end of the life of Governor John Pillsbury. He died in 1901. And it's sometimes said that the Pillsburys were motivated to public service out of a sense of noblesse oblige. And I tried to address that in this passage. This was written about him at the time that he died. John Pillsbury saw perhaps more clearly than most men that good citizenship consists in more than personal probity and the right ballot on election day. This was written by someone who was a contemporary. Personal service is required, and such service he gave, beginning with modest labors and gradually extending this sphere of usefulness as his ideas developed and as his means increased. It is a very conservative estimate that he spent more than 1/3 of his life after removing to Minnesota in the service of the public. That's the end of the quote. Then I say, he had not come to Minnesota just to acquire wealth. And when he did become wealthy, he did not turn to public service out of noblesse oblige, the notion that the wealthy owed service to lesser folk. His thinking was more democratic. It was born in the town meetings of New England, in which each adult male, as John himself described it, plays his part, quote, fully recognizing his rights and his duties within the community. John Pillsbury said this, each man is the equal of the other, and how the rights of each community are upheld. He said that on the day that a town hall he donated to his hometown of Sutton, New Hampshire, was dedicated in 1892. He believed that only if each individual did his part could the whole community thrive. No self-respecting citizen could neglect the needs of his community any more than he could the needs of his family. That's bedrock Pillsbury philosophy. Those with more gave more, as a matter of course, not because of special obligations. Democracy's duties, he maintained, were to be shared by all. New Englanders by the thousands carried that attitude from the granite hills of their youth to the falls of St. Anthony. They built a democratic political culture modeled on the one they left behind. Among them, the first John Sargent Pillsbury of Minnesota was a master builder.
Well, thank you. I think we've used our 5 minutes.